Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Shonen Flop Gaiden, the companion series to the podcast Shonen Flop, about manga series that didn't make it big. I am your host, Tugger Whatley, and this episode is going to be a supplement to the episode concerning the manga Moriking, which ran in Shonen Jump last year, but then got the axe. In particular, we're going to be talking about the Japanese pastime of bug wrestling and going into a bit more detail about that subject. Insert bug pun here, let's dive in. So, as you could probably guess from hearing the floppers talk about the manga Moriking, or maybe you've just picked it up in the past from absorbing Japanese pop culture, but watching bugs fight each other is kind of a big deal in Japan, or at least a medium-sized deal. Definitely more of a thing than it is here. The most popular form of watching bugs fight each other, though, would have to be what is called kabutosumo, or beetle wrestling. The setup for kabutosumo is pretty simple. All you need is to set up a small log or a branch of some sort inside of a glass or plastic container. You put the two beetles who will be fighting each other on separate ends of the log inside of the container, and the last beetle to remain standing on the log is the winner. Pretty similar rules to normal sumo wrestling. However, I have seen a few variations on this while doing my research. One which involves setting up a big wooden rod, and the bug that is able to stay atop the rod is the winner. And I've even seen a tug-of-war-like test of strength between two beetles that you accomplish by getting two clothespins and a piece of twine and having the beetles pull each other to see who's strongest. What is it about rhino beetles that seem to make them practically synonymous with bug wrestling in Japan? Well, probably the biggest reason why the rhinoceros beetle is so popular for wrestling is its great strength. The rhinoceros beetle is able to lift about 850 times its own weight. If a human being had that same ability, then a person with the average body weight of a North American, about 170 something pounds, would be able to lift the Space Shuttle Endeavour, or two people would be able to lift the Statue of Liberty. That's how strong rhinoceros beetles are. And the main way that rhinoceros beetles use this strength is through their main weapon, which is their namesake, the big horn on their head. The rhinoceros beetle gets this horn underneath the opponent and then uses its immense strength to flip the opponent into the air. These beetles have become a huge business in Japan. While a lot of people still go out and use their bug-catching gear to catch their own beetles for battle, a lot of people these days don't have the ability to really do that. You know, a lot of people live in more urban environments where there just aren't a bunch of giant ass beetles around. So a whole industry surrounding buying of beetles and beetle care and beetle breeding and stuff like that has popped up. During the summer, which is peak beetle battling season, you'll have loads of places around Japan that will sell rhinoceros beetles. Even most convenience stores will have beetles for sale to people, usually for the price of between 500 to 1,000 yen, which is about 5 to 10 American dollars. And there are even some vending machines that will sell you live rhinoceros beetles, either to keep as a pet or for battling. However, if you're really, really crazy or really, really rich, you can find super rare imported varieties of beetles for purchase for up to about 1.2 million yen. That's about 11,000 American dollars. And this isn't even the absolute outer limits of the beetle craziness. I found an article talking about the beetle craze in Japan and how a very rare and sought after variety of beetle called Dorcus cordivens has become super sought after in that one specimen because it was over 80 millimeters long, sold to the president of a communications company for apparently 10 million yen, about $90,000. And that in order to keep the deal on the down low, the breeder and the communications company president met in a karaoke booth to finalize the deal and transfer the beetle. Also, there's talk of incidents in 1999 of insect stores in Tokyo being broken into over the summer and over $67,000 worth of beetles being stolen from these stores. Japan's obsession with bugs, bug collecting, and bug fighting has had a huge influence on Japanese pop culture, some of which also filters back into the West. Probably the most well-known and famous of this is Japanese bug fighting and collecting's influence on the Pokemon series, which is regarded to be the most valuable entertainment property in the world right now. In an interview with Time magazine in 1999, the director of the Pokemon series, Tajiri Satoshi, talked about how his growing up in a rural Tokyo suburb called Machida was a huge influence on him and his creation of Pokemon. When he was a little kid, he would spend a lot of time going through rice paddies and rivers and open fields, all just so he could add to his growing bug collection. The kids at school even called him Dr. Bug because of his obsession. However, as the years went on, his Tokyo suburb became more and more developed. More and more the trees were chopped down and the open fields were paved over. Housing developments, building developments. He said a fishing pond would become an arcade center. Tajiri apparently wasn't that into making the insects fight, but he said they would sometimes eat each other. And Tajiri says that growing up this way and seeing everything around him change so much and a new generation of kids being deprived of that same experience that he had growing up was one of the big factors behind his deciding to develop Pokemon. And Pokemon isn't even the only major Japanese game release that revolves around the Japanese penchant for bug fighting and bug collecting. It never reached the United States, but in Japan, there was an arcade game put out by Sega in 2003 called Moriking, mushi meaning bug, and has had sequels come out in arcades in Japan as recently as 2015. The game is something you really never saw in American arcades. It uses collectible cards with barcodes on them, and you'd scan them into the arcade machine, and those cards would correspond to certain types of bugs. Some of them would correspond to certain moves, and then you would input these into the machine, and then you'd have one-on-one fighting game-like battles, except with a weird rock, paper, scissors-like mechanic to it, and you'd play as beetles and fight each other. Apparently this game was a pretty big deal in Japan. In fact, it even got a manga adaptation that ran for 8 volumes and even had a TV anime. Also, notice a similarity between the name of the manga Moriking and the name of the arcade game Moriking. I think it was very obviously inspired by it. And there are tons and tons of other references to beetle fighting, bug collecting, and the like in Japanese pop culture. If you keep an eye out for it, you're likely to run into it. I've definitely run into the penchant for including these sorts of things in a lot of Nintendo games. Maybe it's something about recapturing the magic of their youth or something like that. That leads to the developers to add them in a lot of games. Rhinoceros beetles and other types of beetles are synonymous with bug fighting and bug collecting in Japan, but it's not the only type of bug fighting that is popular in the country. In fact, in the town of Kajiki, in the prefecture of Kagoshima, which is at the very southern tip of Japan, there is an event called Kumogassen, or spider wrestling, which is very popular and has been held going back to the 16th century, that's the 1500s. In order to win, a spider must cut the web of an opponent, wrap the opponent in its own webbing, or bite the opponent in order to paralyze them with its venom. While spider fighting is a pretty popular thing in the southernmost region of Japan, it actually seems to be the Philippines that is the most into spider fighting. It is a big, big deal in that country. The practice is called, and I don't speak these languages, sorry, Paupas Sangdamang, or Pahawai Kaka, or Sabong Sakaka. And the fights are generally held between female orb-weaving spiders, oftentimes to the death, but not always. A lot of these battles seem to end with one spider eating the other spider. And while this is super popular, it actually has a bit of a stigma attached to it, mainly because of the practice of betting and winning prize money for it. Gambling on these matches is illegal in the Philippines, but apparently it still happens quite a lot, and it causes some big problems. Getting a good prize spider and winning money with it is a good way for children to earn money in the Philippines. So there's problems with kids actually skipping out on their schoolwork and putting all their energy into winning money for spider fighting. And I even saw an instance referenced about a teenage boy stabbing another teenage boy to death due to debts incurred from spider fighting. The spider fights are legal in and of themselves, but once gambling is involved, it becomes illegal, and the practice in general is discouraged, but still seems to be very popular. In fact, that previous video you saw of the Japanese spider fighting, the great majority of comments I saw on it were written in Tagalog or in other languages indigenous to the Philippines. So after looking into all this stuff, I was left wondering, why is the Japanese and other Asian countries' relationship with bugs so different from our own? I mean, it's pretty hard to imagine a Western country developing these sorts of bug cultures and bug fighting sporting events and so much thought about bugs and money spent on bugs. How did this begin and why? And to be honest, I didn't really find a definitive answer for that. Apparently, the whole cricket fighting thing has been going on for over 1,000 years in China. There are records of an insect pet shop being set up in Japan in the 1800s. But I couldn't really find anything definitive about how any of this stuff really began or why. There might be a clue, though. On a website called Kokoro, which seems to be concerning Japanese culture, they quote a study by a doctor of medicine at Tokyo Medical and Dental University, saying that, according to his study, Japanese people consider insect noises as soothing or comfortable, and that Western people recognize the sound of insects as noise in their right brain. Japanese people recognize these sounds with their left brain in the same sorts of areas where speech and language is processed. It's crazy that someone's culture could cause such a fundamental difference in how data is processed by the brain. But I don't know. After reading Moriking, listening to the Flop episode about it, and maybe seeing some of the stuff I researched here in this episode of Shonen Flop Gaiden, maybe your appreciation of bugs will change somewhat as well. And with that, the season of this Shonen Flop Gaiden has come to an end. Its fighting days are past it. I hope you learned something and enjoyed yourself. I have been your host, Tucker Whatley. If you want to look up more stuff I've done, you can look at my website, www.tuckerwhatley.com. That's www.tuckerwhatley. You can also follow me on the Twitters, at Tucker Whatley. Same spelling, no punctuation. See you, Space Cowboy.